Ah, a new morning full of new possibilities. Time to head out and explore more of Tyrol. But first, I should probably check in with my retainers.
Good morning!
Good morning to you. Did you find anything interesting while you were out venturing?
I did! I brought you a baby deer!
How did you get a baby deer?
Don't ask questions you don't want the answers to!
Okay.
And I brought you the roof from someone's house!
How did you even...
We just talked about this. Please stop asking questions!
Okay.
Alright, back to venturing I go!
Alright. Bye, I guess. Wow, okay, this is a random collection of items. How do I even sell someone's roof? Does this even go on Market Board? Fortunately, I think I know the right person to ask. Today we will be joined by someone who knows quite a bit about helping the community and about market boards. Even if you don't recognize the name Karashiiro, you are probably familiar with their work. Kara is not only the community developer and co-founder of Universalis, easily the best market board assistant out there, but also the former admin of Crystal Exploratory Missions, a group devoted to organizing runs of the Baldessian Arsenal and Lubrum Regine over on Crystal Data Center. Kara, welcome to Coffee and Carbuncles. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Yeah. Hi, thanks for having me on.
Where are you joining us from today?
I am in Seattle. Seattle area. It's one of those funny things. Everyone says Seattle. They really mean greater Seattle area. But yep, Seattle, Washington.
I have a lot of friends in Kansas City and St. Louis, Missouri, and I definitely understand, and especially like people around Chicago. You definitely have that. We say the name of this city because if we say the name of our city proper, you'll have no idea what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that bothers me a lot, but I feel like if I say the name of the city, no one knows. But if I don't say the name of the city, I feel like I need to give that whole preface.
Right. No, I totally understand. So, what are you drinking while you're joining us today? Hopefully coffee?
Yeah, coffee.
Oh, hey, look at that.
Believe it or not. Yeah, just made some coffee. It's I don't know a whole lot about coffee, but it's a whole bean medium roast. We have a good coffee machine, so.
Do you take any flavors in your coffee specifically?
Not typically. There is one brand. What was it? Like Red Lion. I think they're a Hawaiian brand. They have like a vanilla macadamia that I like. But, other than that, it's mostly just regular old black coffee.
It always surprises me because I tend to get pretty fancy with my coffees, cinnamon, cream, or like hazelnut and vanilla. And a surprising amount of people just take their coffee black. And I don't know, it's not for me, I guess, but it does surprise me a little. For instance, I actually have hot cocoa with a lot of raspberry flavor added.
Yeah, that sounds fun. I mean, honestly, I'm surprised to hear that. I feel like most people I know get those sorts of fancy coffees.
For me, fancy coffees are something as kind of a treat. Like I'll get myself a really dolled up latte, usually maybe an hour before an interview, or especially like on a Monday and a Friday morning. Mondays to be like, hey, I really need to motivate myself, and Friday as a little, hey, you made it to Friday, well done. Sort of treat.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's valid. Like, treat yourself. Yeah, even the other day, I walk by Starbucks every morning on the way to work because I mean it's Seattle. There's a Starbucks on every corner, but it's just the start of pumpkin spice season, so I finally got myself a pumpkin spice latte. I think it's maybe the first time I've had one. I actually didn't like it that much, but it was worth trying, I think.
Well, I think what throws people off, if you've never had a pumpkin spice latte before, is there's not pumpkin in pumpkin spice. Pumpkin spice literally means like the spice you put in a pumpkin pie, and it's like clove, cinnamon, and a few other things. And so I think people, if they've never had one before, they're expecting pumpkin, and instead you actually get a chai. Really, the difference between pumpkin spice and chai is, I think, cardamom is maybe just one spice.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah. I actually didn't know that. I'm not sure what exactly I was expecting when I got it, but oh, the way it tasted was oh, I don't feel like it reminded me of anything in particular. It was just sort of strong and spice adjacent.
Yeah, no, it's not for everyone. I definitely understand. So obviously you're from Seattle, greater Seattle metropolitan area. Um, Tell me about your background a bit. Like, what do you do for hobbies outside of 14? I know we're going to get into it later, but it seems like you do a lot of coding stuff.
Yeah, I mean, when I'm not programming 14 related stuff, I'm programming non-14 related stuff mostly.
So, what about coding appeals to you so much? Like, how did you get into the hobby?
Hmm. Yeah, I think I sort of just probably just started doing it in school at some point and eventually got to the point where they started teaching classes and I just like the like logical complexity of the problems it solves. But I mean, now that I've been programming or rather developing software for several years, oh, maybe that's changed a little. Now I just sort of like to dabble in whatever I haven't done before.
Understandable. You eventually get to a point where you're a little bored with the usual and you're like, all right, well, what haven't I done with this skill yet?
Yep.
So, how did you come to the Final Fantasy franchise?
Hmm. Well, if we're talking about the series as a whole, when I was in middle school, I think maybe it was elementary school. I hardly remember now. I was given Final Fantasy XIII for the Xbox 360. Uh, I I never finished it actually. I got stuck on Bahamut closer to the end of the game when I came back to it a few years ago. But still I got really invested in it and even got 13.2 and Lightning Returns on a clearance sale at some point. So I'd have them lined up when I finished the first game, which I'll reiterate I never finished.
That's interesting because usually when I hear people talk about Final Fantasy and their gateway into it, it's usually like 10 or one of the older games or 11. It's curious that you started with 13. How did you make that jump then from 13 to Final Fantasy 14?
When you put the question like that, it's funny because it was the next game. But setting that aside, I think probably the main difference is I'm sure most of the other people you've asked that question are about 7 to 10 years older than me. So you know, uh, when someone gets a Final Fantasy game, they probably get whatever's current at the time, and 13 was current at the time when I was in elementary, middle school.
So what made you decide to try 14? Just it was the next in the series or
Hmm. Thinking about it, that's actually interesting too, because it actually had very little to do with the fact that it was the Final Fantasy game. Because before 14, I was also playing lots of MMOs already, mostly like free-to-play ones like Lattale, Phantasy Star Online. But at some point I got bored of most of them, and was just looking around and um, I think it was some YouTube video where someone was like, "Yeah, this is why Final Fantasy XIV is the greatest MMO ever." And I picked up their trial and liked it, and so I just started doing it. So, yep.
and do you remember what expansion you joined in or around what patch it was?
It was Stormblood.
Okay. I know before Stormblood, 14 actually had a 13 crossover featuring Lightning. And then I remember they did it again a little later. I don't know if you were around for that. Did you get to experience the 14-13 crossover?
I didn't, and actually I had forgotten about that, but I think that actually happened not too long before I started playing 14, maybe like a couple months before or something. Uh, I remember seeing a mention of it. I was like, oh, dang, would have been cool to do that.
It was interesting. I don't remember if the 13 or the 11 crossover came first, but I remember that it was kind of confusing seeing Lightning in 14, just given the path of 14's narrative at the time. Now that they've kind of elaborated on Eorzea being more like a dimensional crossroads of sorts, and now that we've had more crossovers, 11, 15, it makes more sense. But at the time, I remember it was a little kind of strange, but still fun.
I can imagine, like, I feel like crossovers tend to just sort of be that way in general. They feel a little bit like wrong somehow. But then, once the series starts doing them like enough times, then it's like, oh, well, this is just sort of a thing that this game does.
Or, you're the Nier franchise, in which case every crossover is canon, and that's just how it goes. Done. Don't need to explain how, it just happens, and we're moving on with it.
Yep. And yeah, that it still stuns me a little bit that we managed to get a whole Alliance Raid series for a near crossover. I mean, I liked it, but yeah, it was surprising.
For sure. The past few months, I've been trying to focus more on the music of the Final Fantasy franchise with this podcast. So I have to ask, do you have any particular Final Fantasy soundtracks you enjoy, or have you dived into a lot of the franchise's music?
Yeah, I think probably. So even though I played 13 like so long ago, I think I do distinctly remember liking Lightning's theme a lot. It sort of reflects like what one of the reasons that I found myself really liking 13 going back a little bit is that just it sort of introduced me to the unique kind of melodrama almost that Final Fantasy likes for its writing, and I think Lightning's theme reflects that a lot. Uh, but yeah, I also like other songs from the series, mostly from 14, actually. Like, Ink Long Dry, that's the Google Libraries theme. Flow from Endwalker, that's a great one. Even what's it? I don't remember the name, but the level 96 dungeon from Dawn Trail, that one had a really cool theme too.
Ink Long Dry and Stars Long Dead are two of my favorite themes from 14, so I definitely understand. I've actually said on a previous podcast episode, people have different opinions of Final Fantasy 13, either its combat or what a lot of people consider very linear maps. But one thing I feel you can't dispute is that 13, the original 13 game, has one of the best soundtracks of any game in the franchise.
Yeah, I mean, I guess definitely. Uh, I feel like just that sort of hmm, how do I put it? Like that sort of big orchestral choir type sound where like uh I don't know how to describe it exactly, but I feel like you also hear it in like the Nier franchise, for example. I think they also do like that sort of similar sound, but yeah, 13's is unique.
Absolutely. So getting a little bit back on track, getting back to 14, what was it like starting out in 14 for you? Tell us about sort of your beginnings in the game.
Yeah, when I started, I played 14 probably a lot like the other free-to-play MMOs that I was playing before, in the sense that like I sort of mostly played on my own and had to kind of like mentally prepare myself for doing dungeons and stuff, because that's sort of like, in a lot of these free-to-play MMOs, it's like, yeah, it's a little harder, but you can just sort of do things yourself and you don't really need to actually interact with people, funny enough. But yeah, even when I joined an FC, it wasn't really for any particular reason. I just wanted to stop getting the random invites. So I joined the largest open invite FC I could find. But yeah, I had played probably enough MMOs at that point to know people could be a mixed bag. So I just sort of hid in the crowd enjoying the story until I hit the level cap. And then they released Eureka, and Eureka was sort of what brought me into the community, I guess, proper, in the sense that that was what I started doing, like programming projects for the community. So
let's talk about that. Let's go into a bit more detail. You're kind of playing the game but not really part of the community, and then you get into a zone that you definitely have to do community stuff to get past a lot of it by design for most of that. Tell me about how that starts. What did you do for the community at that time, and how was it received?
yeah, it was definitely a different type of content altogether. When they finally released when they released Eureka's Raid, the Baldessian Arsenal, that was that was probably a product of that same design philosophy, I suppose, where even though like everyone's sort of going into it separately, to some extent, everyone needs to organize and work together to actually clear. And so one of the first things that happened was, people started making these community discords for organizing Baldessian Arsenal runs. I was on Ether at the time, and there was a server operated mostly by someone named Ida. She's also the administrator of the like PSO2 community Discord. So if that's a name that sounds familiar either to you or to anyone else, that's why. And I started doing that, and at first it was actually mostly just because I wanted to clear and get my mount. But after I did it like once or twice, I was like, actually, this is the way of thinking about this content makes me actually want to continue doing it to like help other people clear. And so I started doing it a lot for that reason too. And I would go into their sort of queue, because Ether had this bot set up for scheduling runs. They had like a sort of makeshift queue system for it. And if we filled up and there were more places for new people, I would be more than happy to step out for that, or to fill a spot on like a different party to balance things more. Finally, when the server split happened, because that was a thing at that point, we sort of had this split where a bunch of Ether servers and a bunch of Primal servers were moved to this new data center, Crystal, along with a couple new worlds added to that. And so, all the people that were on Ether doing this kind of wanted like a similar system on whatever we set up on Crystal. So when we were discussing that, I sort of volunteered to just like, set up that system. I said, people on Ether at least have this expectation for how they want the content to be run. So let me see if I can give them that experience that they're expecting. I basically wrote my own bot from scratch that replicated a lot of the same functionality that Ether had, and maintained that for, well, I mean, I still maintain it, even though it doesn't need nearly as much maintenance now.
We all got sundered by Yoshi P.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what you spend, it seems, a lot of time and effort doing coding projects, various kinds for the community, more of which we'll get into in part 2 of the interview. But what would you say drives you to put all this time and all of this effort into these communal resources?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, I really just want people to have fun. And I think there are certain pain points that I can help ease to make the game more fun for other people. With the Baldessian Arsenal, it was, replicating that queue system and scheduler that Ether had, to make it easier for people to get into that scene, I guess. And now it's organizing market data so that people have a much easier time getting the deals that they need.
And does it ever get difficult to juggle all these projects? Because it sounds like you kind of purposely put a lot of different projects on your plate.
Yeah, it does, and it's only gotten harder over time, really. Though I haven't given up on time management just yet. But yeah, I get really invested in the things that I'm working on, so I always need to be careful not to spend too much time on any one thing, or else I'll completely forget the others. But yeah, maybe part of the way I help balance that for myself is I make sure that the systems that I design are mostly self-maintaining. So other than dealing with major outages or whatnot, they don't need me to actively babysit those systems. They do what they need to do for everyone.
Now, I'm going to get a little personal, and if you don't feel comfortable answering this, that is completely fine. But I realize that having places to host all these things that you make can get pretty pricey. Hopefully, you're not paying for all of these websites completely out of pocket. Hopefully, there's stuff like PayPal or Patreon and stuff that's helping with some of these costs in terms of maintenance.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So for context, Universalis probably costs on the order of $300 a month to operate. Um, Thankfully, I pay next to none of that out of pocket. We have a Patreon set up on for that website, and just people who are gracious enough to donate to this. They donate through Patreon or through Coffee or Libera Pay, whatever, and through them we're able to offer this for free, basically, and also not at much cost to myself most months.
I'm glad to hear it because it sounds like you're already putting in a pretty sizable time investment with these projects as it is.
Yeah. Well, um, yeah, especially with work in the picture now too. But at least I think recently most of my time investment has been dealing with operational issues. Basically, when there are outages, putting in the time to figure out what the issue is and to fix it. And thankfully, there are plenty of community members who help with that too when that sort of thing does happen. Um, but yeah, it is still a lot.
Obviously, Universalis, the focus of this episode, is a pretty big project in and of itself. And in part two, I'd really like to dive into that with you, the history of it, things like maintenance, the Discord, and how the new expansion has affected the website. So if you'll stick around after the break, we'll have a little rest, and then we will dive right into part two.
All right.
All right, we will see you all in a few minutes in part two of the interview. Hello, friend. Do you find your retainers bring you all sorts of random minions? Is your backpack full of Allegan melons and miniature minecarts? Does your free company chest have more wind-up hobgoblins than any of you know what to do with? Then hurry on down to Nobu's Minion Emporium. Whether you're looking to buy or sell, we can help you with all of your minion trading needs. Those Tengu dolls your free company doesn't want could become another free company's new mascot. That minute mind flayer you find ugly might just be another adventurer's new best friend. So come on down and get to trading those unwanted minions for some sweet, sweet gil today. Legal disclaimer, Nobu's Minion Emporium is not an authorized animal shelter and does not deal in actual living creatures. Also, to the person who thinks they are being clever by putting atrophied Atomos minions in our mailbox, please stop. All of our mail keeps getting sent to the 13th and it's making it very hard to pay our bills. We know who you are and we will find you. Thank you. Welcome back. I'm here with Karashiiro, and we are about to dive into the second half of our chat about the market board website, Universalis. Kara, welcome back.
Yeah, thank you. Happy to be here.
Now, I want to dive right into it. You run a website, Market Universalis. I briefly touched on in my introduction what kind of website it is, but I want to know, how do you describe your project in your own words?
Yeah, so Universalis is a market board website for Final Fantasy XIV, and it lets you see current market data for every marketable item on every world without having to log in and check yourself. Players can put in their world and time zone information into the website, and all of the pages will show market listings on their current data center with information about when each item's market data was last refreshed. It's especially useful if you're crafting, for example, since you can make lists of items and check the cheapest prices for all of your materials at once. Uh, other website, Other websites like Saddlebag Exchange and Teamcraft consume data from Universalis actually to offer additional analyses too, so it's also worth looking at those too.
And a few things that I want to mention for those that aren't necessarily crafters is, for me personally, if I'm looking for new gear, what I love about Universalis is it actually splits the page for an item between normal and high quality if you're looking for something that does have high quality. But also, especially for me, it's great for minion collecting because minion prices can vary drastically between worlds.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned minion prices actually, because minion prices can tend to be one of the things that it's a little bit harder to keep track of prices for, but I suppose we'll elaborate on that a bit later.
It Minions and materia both, I mean, even within one world, can fluctuate drastically hour to hour. So I definitely understand. But yes, we will be talking about that later. So Universalis is really cool. Like I just said, I use it myself, and I'm curious, is it difficult to stay on top of things? Obviously, 14 has people constantly buying and selling. How does Universalis keep track of all this? You just said your website mentions refresh rates.
Yeah,
Or
well,
not refresh rates, but like market check rates. How often people are checking the prices of things.
yeah. So Universalis is a bit interesting in how it's architected, in the sense that it's actually a crowdsourced API. And so basically, because the entire website's data is crowdsourced, anyone running like a specialized uploader client, there's a download like on the website, can check the market board manually, and that uploader will send the market data that they see to Universalis. Everyone like checks the market board sometimes, and so if all of those sometimeses are aggregated, we're able to keep things collectively up to date for everyone. That's sort of the dynamic that it exploits.
And what it means also is that you personally aren't going world to world to world, constantly trying to update prices for a million items.
Yeah. Uh, yeah. As I mentioned before, I like services that sort of take care of themselves, and this is one way in which we're able to offer something that also fits that.
So, roughly, how accurate would you say these prices tend to be?
Yeah, this is the part that gets a little more interesting, because it really depends on the item, and that is also a consequence of crowdsourcing. So items that are manually checked more frequently, uh, and I'll clarify, manually checked by players running these upload clients, will have the most up-to-date prices within maybe seconds or minutes. While items that are less popular will have less up-to-date prices, maybe days or longer. Um, on the homepage, I think for logged in users, maybe logged out users too, there's a list of like the least recently updated items on your world to sort of like encourage people to check those. The reason why earlier I said that minions are sort of an interesting case is because minions, mounts, those sorts of like very rare, very usually high price collectibles, those are actually items that are in a like weird kind of middle between those. Like there's not like as high of a proportion of players that are interested in buying and selling those, So they tend to be like just a little bit out of date. But because the prices can fluctuate so much, that gets a little interesting, and sometimes those can be less accurate. But things like crafting materials, everyone always needs crafting materials. Those will always be up to date. Same with materia. So, yep, it varies a lot.
I was about to say that it's like also one of the big differences is if I get a piece of materia, I may need that same piece of materia later for a different piece of gear. Whereas if I get a minion, I only need that minion once.
Exactly. And so, yeah, when someone running an uploader gets what they need, and it's like, well, yeah, that unless they're doing like something like flipping, for example, like once they buy what they need, they stop checking it.
Could you tell me about the history of Universalis? I imagine in my head it's a very young version of the website and you running around checking market board statistics.
Yeah, thankfully no. So yeah, Universalis started in like I think 2019. I was still in high school at the time, right after an existing service called Mogboard stopped being actively updated. Mogboard was a project written by Vekian, former XIV API operator. And for those who are unaware, XIV API is sort of like a sort of free community-run API for game data. But yeah, they also ran this thing called Mogboard, which published market data. But that became unsustainable to operate due to relying on effectively botting the companion app. The way it worked, to summarize, I guess, is they basically got like a ton of like accounts that they used as bots against the companion app API, running those on a schedule to keep things like extremely up to date, like more up to date than Universalis. But as a consequence of that, those accounts started getting banned, so they kept buying more, and yeah, the pricing for them on that just became unsustainable super fast. But you know, once the accounts started getting banned regularly, they had to reduce the frequency of data updates until it just became too infrequent to be useful. I was already involved in some work separately to reverse engineer the game's network data, so I figured that could be applied to market data too. To make a sort of replacement for Mogboard. Most of the game's network data had already been reverse engineered by others, so I only had to handle a few on my own. Separately from that, I was also acquainted with Goat of Dalamud fame at that point. And when I was talking about Universalis in the Dalamud server, he offered to help work on that with me too. So while he's focused on Dalamud now, he's also the co-founder of Universalis with me. But yeah, one of the probably main interesting bits there is that so as Mogboard was on its way out, we actually asked Vekian if we could use Mogboard's like entire website as the basis for ours. And he thankfully graciously agreed, and we basically took the entire front end website, the part that people actually see, and put a completely different like back end behind it. So yeah, I mean, with all of those contributions together like that, we were able to put this together in a matter of months, I think, and we were able to launch that.
That's amazing. Wow. I'm glad you're able to have so much help with that.
Yeah, I mean, so many people helped directly and indirectly with that, even though like the entire backend was still written by me myself. I don't think it would have been able to happen without the like prior and ongoing contributions of so many other community developers.
And let's go ahead and jump into that. You talked a little bit about maintenance and stuff. Is it a difficult site to manage? Do you have a lot of site and Discord mods and such that need to help, or is it more of people report a problem on the Discord and then you kind of address things as needed?
Yeah, it's a fair mix, I think. So for one thing, even though I started with this with Goat, now that Ghost's project is so big, he's not able to help as much anymore. So the website now is solely operated by myself. Operational issues are rare. They happen like a few times a year, but they're extremely time consuming. But yeah, there's no like mods for the website. It's basically me, and when either I see a major metric spike on my dashboards for the website, or when a flood of people come in reporting something like that, that means that I need to get to work. And but on the Discord side, yeah, I do have a couple of two moderators now, those being Cliff and Indopan runs Saddlebag Exchange. But yeah, that was because basically when Dawn Trail released the most recent expansion, the additional load from that, and particularly other projects using Universalis data, caused enough of a operational issue that I really needed people to help manage the Discord and the influx of questions. So I brought them on board. They've been very helpful.
Speaking of, I want to ask about that. What is it like when a new expansion is released? What do you have to do behind the scenes for your website? Because I know when I was talking with the creator of Eorzea collection, he said that when a new expansion drops, there's definitely a lot of time spent just trying to update the site with every item.
Yeah, I listened to that episode, and the way they do it is interesting. On our side, it's definitely a lot more straightforward, mostly because we don't need like actual images of gear items. For us, it's as simple as like when the patch releases, I basically just download it locally. Then I put a few of the game data files on the server, and it uses those to sort of like say, yeah, now these new items are marketable, for example, because there's like a sort of restriction. There's a lot of restrictions basically on what uploads are valid to sort of prevent garbage data from making a mess of things. And then on the front end side, the website, the part people see, I need to also do like a separate export of data there, and then publish a new version of the website. And yeah, I think that's all. Wait, no, there is one other thing. So in addition to that, for our official uploaders, the standalone one and the ACT plugin, I also need to sort of take the latest like network metadata, I guess, and update those uploaders with that, so that the uploaders are able to identify the correct network messages to read market data from. So yeah, I mean it sounds technically complex, but all in all, it usually only takes me like a day or less, or more precisely like a morning before work and an afternoon after.
Interesting. I had no idea how long it would take. I figured it might be a bit of a strenuous process.
Yeah. Well, actually, there is one other thing I forgot, which is basically getting the new like high quality item icons. Because like the super high quality ones that show up on the market pages themselves, those come from LodestoneDB, the official website, and those require like a separate export process, which takes like a few hours, but most of that is just letting some script run.
Understandable. Something I love about your website is, unlike other 14 resources, you guys don't rely on web page translations like Google Translate. Something I noticed on the Discord is you actually have language options on your site and devoted areas of your Discord specifically for translation. And I just think that is the neatest thing. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So in a lot of the other projects I spend time around, we like to sort of encourage people to volunteer to translate things. Like, and that's a model that I replicated for Universalis. Like, it's a slower process, and as a result of it, some languages aren't entirely complete in their support. But one of the things that I and others have understood with experience is that machine translations aren't always great. Community translations tend to be much better, and there are usually generous community members passionate enough to contribute translations. It's especially important for games and game websites, since in a lot of cases there are some words that have like official translations in other languages, and the website translations should always be like consistent with that in order to make sense in context. Like Teamcraft is the same thing, for example. I don't think they have a dedicated public space, but I do know that they have like a crowd in for community translations, for example.
When I first found that, obviously, when I first saw it on the website, I thought that it might be an auto-translate thing, and then I joined the Discord, and I just remember thinking it was the neatest thing.
Well, yeah, I'm happy with the quality of it, and also very very proud that people have been willing to put in the time to do that.
I think it really helps show that when we say community resource, we really do mean community resource, both in the essence that it is for the community, but also just how crowdsourced this resource happens to be.
Yeah, I mean, we stand on the shoulders of giants, something along those lines.
So you've also worked on Teamcraft, and until today, I haven't actually heard of Teamcraft. So could you tell me about that?
Really, that's interesting. Yeah. So Teamcraft is basically as the name suggests, a crafting specific website. They do things like you can put together like material lists and then see like what the cheapest way to get materials are, combining both Universalis data with like shop information for things that you can just like buy from regular shops. And they also let you like create and share crafting rotations with like gear sets and stuff. There's all sorts of like super useful stuff there to make crafting a little bit easier. They also have like inventory tracking and stuff, which is built on the like initial systems that I put together for reading and processing network data. So yeah.
That's neat. And you said that Teamcraft takes data from Universalis and expands on it. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, so basically one of Teamcraft's existing features for a long time before Universalis and Mogboard were around is saying this is like you have a list of crafting materials and want to see where the cheapest way to purchase those crafting materials or potentially to gather them is. Well, if you're purchasing them, you need to consider that the market board is a good place to get materials, and the costs of those materials are going to fluctuate on that market board. You want to have up-to-date information for that to say that, yeah, this is how much this item will cost to craft at this particular time. And so what Teamcraft does, one thing that it does, is it consumes data from Universalis to say, yeah, this is right now what it will cost to craft this item.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, I feel like I wouldn't be a good host if I didn't ask, going forward, do you have any other projects in the works right now, or any changes that you're planning to Universalis?
Well, there are always things to add to any website. I have a whole list, multiple lists, which are fairly unorganized of things to add to Universalis, from improving the UI to expanding data collection and all those things. So yeah, there's a lot planned there, assuming I find the time for it. But separately from Universalis, well, we'll see if I ever finish it. I have a hard time finishing projects sometimes, but there's a thing I'm working on called Simulacrum, and what that is effectively It's a plugin that makes it so that you can sort of create and share like in-game billboards, kind of like in the actual 3D space. You could play on videos on them and sort of have like shared like watch parties, for example. That I've been working on for a while and haven't gotten around to finishing that, but I know that when I do finish that, it'll be cool.
Keep me updated on that, and if you do finish it, please let me know.
Yeah, we'll do.
Well, we're approaching the end of the interview, and I really appreciate you taking time to be here. And now we get to that point where I have to ask, do you have questions for me? Because you've been kind enough to answer my questions the past hour.
Yeah. Let me think. I'm really curious, actually. So, what sort of drove you to do a season on community websites to begin with?
So, season 2 was actually supposed to primarily be about music. That didn't quite pan out. There were some issues mid-season. We had to change up some guests, and what was meant to be a very music-heavy season kind of had to be rewritten halfway through. And so, as I was contemplating, well, what does the second half of Coffee and Carbuncles season 2 look like? I thought, well, there are resources, primarily Eorzea collection and Universalis, that I don't feel like my 14 playing experience would be quite the same without. I literally use both websites, I'd say at least once a week. So I thought that it would be really neat to help shed light on who made these websites. What's the driving reason for these people making these community resources? And also I wanted to highlight those resources and help share them with people that may not necessarily know about these very good, very helpful websites. For the rest of the season, we're going to try and get a little bit more back on track with music. There's some stuff that I don't really want to share this episode about the remaining 3 interviews of season 2, but that people will obviously discover here in a few months. Though, really, I think it's just the same reason that you enjoy working on these projects is the same reason that I want to help highlight these projects, and that's because ultimately at the end of the day, it helps the broader 14 community as a whole.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to finding out what the rest of the season is like. I'll be paying attention to that.
I'm glad. I'll try not to disappoint.
Actually, I have another question. Maybe it's a bit early to draw conclusions, but I'm interested. Now that you're a few episodes in, have you noticed more similarities or differences in your interviewees and their projects compared to in the first season?
When it comes to my guests, I haven't noticed a lot of differences. I've actually noticed way more similarities than I ever expected. For instance, I did not expect so many of my guests to be into coding as either primary or side hobbies, but it turns out a lot of them are, current guests included. Because for instance, when it comes to interviewing you, I expect that obviously you like coding because you're on here to talk about things you've coded. I was not so much expecting, for instance, Leon, who I had on to talk about photography, to be as into coding. That surprised me a little. But also, the more people I interview, the more I find that you really do have this common thread of it doesn't matter if you raid or you do glamour or you host events and never touch a raid. Regardless of the reason that you're part of the 14 community, the the genuine love that people have for the game is wonderful. And it's so heartwarming because if you go purely off of some news articles or what you might see on some social media, you think that we have this sort of vicious, backbiting community that's perpetually trying to burn itself down. And I just hope that people who listen to this podcast get as much of the opposite impression of that as possible, because I think that beyond the public shouting matches you might see from different sectors of the community, ultimately most of people, I want to believe, are playing this game because they genuinely love being part of the 14 community and playing this game.
Yeah, I mean, most of us are here to have a good time, and I mean that's what I make things for to help people continue to have a good time. So, actually, if I can add just one more like tiny mini question
Go
about
for it.
about how many of your interviewees have been interested in drawing.
I don't actually know. I don't think that's something that's really come up that much, so I really couldn't tell you.
Hmm. Because I heard that Edion likes drawing, and even though I didn't mention it before, I like to do a bit of drawing on the side too. I wonder if that turns out to be a common thread eventually too.
Now, I will say that on previous episodes, Leon's daughter obviously draws a lot and likes likes creating narratives around her drawings, and I remember that I was very excited about that because I just thought it was so cute and so creative of her. But obviously, I had on Fwash, who hosts art parties, and so that's definitely one more for the count. So I can confirm between you, Fwash, Edion, and Leon's daughter, let's say 3.5, and that's as far as I'm comfortable taking that number, but I am willing to suspect that it's higher than that.
Yeah, people who create things like to create things.
Yeah. And I realize that some people are hearing that and going, well, that seems like kind of circular, but it's true. If I could phrase that slightly better, I'd say creative people find various outlets with which to be creative through.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. Definitely. Well, I I always like when a thing is shaped like itself, but that's a better way of putting it.
Well, for instance, to help give an example, obviously we have people who do coding who obviously like drawing, and that's an interesting Venn diagram we'll have to make. But also, for instance, I host this podcast, but also to shed a little bit more light on my projects, I also like writing fan fiction. I also do a lot of text role play. I don't do so much drawing because I don't feel that I'm artistic in that way, but I do enjoy a lot of screenshots, and I do enjoy trying to put images together in my own way.
It's interesting that you bring up fan fiction, because I mean, podcasting and fan fiction, those are both forms of writing. So I wonder if there's something there too.
And text roleplay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I spend a pretty good amount of my time writing for either one project or another. If I'm not writing fan fiction stuff, I'm writing roleplay stuff. If I'm not doing either of those, I'm writing scripts for skits for this podcast. If I'm not doing any of that, I actually do a lot of writing in regards to Japanese history research on the side. So, in one way or another, a very common sound from my room is click clacking of keyboard keys. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's one of those things where when I'm sure you've experienced this with all the coding stuff you do. When you have this drive to be creative, when you finally find time to schedule, you're like, I'm not going to do anything. I'm finally going to relax. And then you get there and you're like, okay, cool. Relaxing was nice for 2 minutes, but I am so bored now and so antsy because I feel like I should be
Exactly.
doing something. So in one way or another, yeah. I mean, there's definitely that need for creative outlets in one form or another.
Yeah.
I think that was a very fun way to end the interview. Thank you for those questions.
Yeah, of course.
And that's definitely something I'm going to have to check back in with previous guests, and I'll see about getting back to you with answers on that. But that's something that I haven't really considered, but now you've got me very curious about.
I bet there's going to be a lot of interesting findings there.
For sure. Well, Kara, thank you so much for being here today and taking time out of your day to do this with me.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
I hope that you'll have a wonderful rest of your weekend. And I hope that people who regularly use Universalis or one of your other projects will finish listening to this with a good sense of learning more about you and what drives you to create these resources for the community.
Yeah, likewise. And if I may, I hope some part of it inspires them to create their own things too.
Absolutely. People have asked me before, what's something that you want from coffee and carbuncles? And I've told people that something I would really like is if it gets more people to create 14 content.
Yeah, I think it would be a beautiful thing to see.
Absolutely. Well, have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you later.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
I'm so glad Kara took the time to talk with us today. I also hope that this interview and the one before it help shed light on not only the great resources that you could use to improve your experience in Eorzea, but also the amazingly creative people behind those resources. The amount of investment, both time wise and financially, that people give to make these resources available to us is something I feel we should all be very appreciative of. Now, before you depart, I have several big pieces of news I need to tell you about. First, later this month, I will be featured in the newest edition of the Aether Entertainer magazine. I had the honor of being interviewed for the magazine about the creation of Coffee and Carbuncles and what motivates me to do these interviews, so I hope you'll check that out. Second, I'll be hosting a panel at this year's AetherCon, previously LunarCon. This will be my second year of having a panel at the convention, and I am doing a panel on why disliking and worse yet stigmatizing our peers is kind of silly, since if you're playing the game, you are already, by definition, RPing. I hope everyone will come to AetherCon this year. It's a wonderful 3-day virtual experience and a fantastic gathering of people from all over the community. Now, following AetherCon, at the start of October, I'll be in St. Louis, Missouri in the United States for Gateway Fate. This will be my first IRL 14 gathering. I've never gotten to attend FanFest or been to KupoCon, so I'm very excited to attend Gateway Fate. I'll be meeting Fruity Snacks in person, which will be the first time I've ever met someone featured on the podcast face to face. So I'm excited and nervous at the same time, but I think it'll be a lot of fun. Now, unfortunately, with all of that having been said, this does lead me to the final announcement of this episode. With AetherCon being at the end of September and Gateway Fate being at the start of October, I'm not going to have a lot of time to record or edit the October episode of Coffee and Carbuncles, so October's episode will be coming out more towards the end of the month, though November's episode should be at the usual time, so you'll be getting October and November's episodes pretty close together. Well, That's everything. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. Please, stay safe in your travels and remember, when you need a place to relax, to get away from the world for a little bit, this cafe will be here, with warm coffee and wonderful guests. So until next time, take care.